Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule. You got nothing to do anyway, and we appreciate you watching. We got a great program with good reporters, and later on, Attorney General Dana Nessel, who I'm sure will make some news if we can ask her the right questions. All right, so let's start out with this question to you, Lauren. The Attorney General advised the State Capitol Commission that it could ban guns in the Capitol, so why didn't they follow her lead and do it?
Yeah, Tim. So I think that there is still a little bit of concern from the Capitol Commission's perspective about whether they have the authority to do it. As you mentioned, Attorney General Nessel has said they do have the authority to do it and should, but the Capitol Commission isn't sold yet. Essentially, they are charged with managing the rules and the maintenance of the state Capitol building. And they're wondering at this point if a potential ban on guns in certain areas of the Capitol is within their purview.
Jonathan, what did you make of all this?
Well, I think there's two issues at play. There's one, what the statute actually says and how much authority that gives the Capitol Commission. And then there's just the understanding of people who got appointed to these positions and thought, as, Commissioner John Truscott said, we thought we'd be, gardeners, in charge of monitoring restoration of the Capitol. And they didn't necessarily imagine they'd be thrust in the middle of a debate of this kind. So I think those are two separate issues, whether they have the legal authority, which of course Attorney General Dana Nessel has said they clearly do, and whether they, want to get in the middle of an issue like this. Obviously, lawmakers have the authority to do something on their own should they choose. That's unlikely, I think, given the strong Second Amendment leanings of the Republican-led legislature and their sort of alignment with gun rights activists over the years. So, I think we're sort of at a stalemate, which is not unexpected, in my opinion.
Zachary, what do you think?
I mean, I agree with all of that. I'll just add in the other pieces. You have Republican majorities in the House and Senate, and the majority of the Capitol Commission is ultimately answerable to those majorities, the way the Capitol Commission is structured. And, there are very strong pro-gun majorities among the, with the Republicans being in charge in the House and Senate. And they have always sort of looked very favorably and positively on some of the events like the Open Carry Day, when activists come to the Capitol grounds and are openly carrying weapons on the grounds to, demonstrate in favor of maintaining those rights. The idea that the Capitol Commission, again, ultimately answerable to these Republican majorities, would pass some type of gun restriction just doesn't seem likely.
Zach, that's a good point, but I think what we need to do is put this Capitol Commission in some sort of a perspective as to why it was created in the first place, and it wasn't to pass legislation. Basically, there was a lot of controversy surrounding lawmakers having to spend tax dollars to fix their offices, to put new carpeting in the Capitol, so they got together and said, let's take this out of our arena and give it to somebody else so that we're not under fire for spending all the tax money to do all this. That was the genesis of the Capitol Commission. So by definition, I don't think anybody in the beginning thought that they would even get into this issue of trying to decide whether we ought to do this or that, the Attorney General notwithstanding. Jonathan, where is this thing headed, do you think?
Well, the Capitol Commission formed a smaller committee to study the issue, which, in government parlance typically doesn't inspire a ton of confidence. I think ultimately, Zach is right. I don't see the commission doing anything too aggressive, considering they are answerable to the legislature. I think a possible compromise might be for the legislative leaders to consider regulations in the galleries themselves, so that the Capitol as a whole would not be closed to firearms, but, allowing people with rifles to stand above lawmakers while they work might be one possible concession. I don't know for a fact whether either the GOP leaders are willing to do that, but it would stand to reason that it would be, sort of an olive branch, and certainly something that's within their authority to do by rule without the need for a statutory change.
And I think right now sorry, Tim, but I think right now the Michigan House, their gallery is currently closed to the public because they have lawmakers voting in there right now to observe social distancing guidelines. So it seems as though there's already a precedent to, potentially disallow guns in that arena. And the gallery photos in the Senate chamber were what went viral on Twitter, were what people were really concerned about, because that gallery level is directly above lawmakers, and that potentially makes the best case for lawmakers' safety at this point. So I do think Jonathan has a good point. If there's a partial compromise reached either by the commission or the legislature, it could be that chamber regulation as opposed to the full Capitol.
As I listened to the debate of the commission, I sensed, reading the tea leaves, it was a 3-3 vote with the speaker, or excuse me, the guy who works for the speaker, the clerk, and the secretary of the Senate who works for Mr. Shirkey. Both of those are pro-gun guys. And Mr. Trescott were probably not going to go there, but the other three might. Let's put a cap on this, Zach. Do you think at the end of the day the commission votes yay or nay on this?
Well, I think ultimately it's going to have to be a decision of the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader. And I think what Jonathan and Lauren talked about is right, that the focus, I think, will end up being on the galleries. And that's something more under the purview of the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader than the Commission. Perhaps, I just don't think the Commission wants to deal with this. I think ultimately the Speaker and Senate Majority Leader have to decide. I really don't know whether they'll decide to prevent firearms from being brought into the galleries. It's the kind of thing where if they are able to cool this out and know what shows up again for a while, they might be able to sort of let this die out. But if this keeps happening, they're going to have to make a decision.
I think you guys are right that the gallery is something that the two leaders can control, but somebody is going to say, oh, okay, so then it's all right to carry an Uzi into the rotunda of the Capitol and somebody could get shot there. We're not worried about that. So it doesn't end the debate. It may just turn the page to another issue. But now let's turn to our Attorney General, Dana Nessel, for her patience, for waiting with us. Good morning, Madam Attorney General. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you.
Madam Attorney General, did the Capitol Commission wimp out by studying this issue rather than just banning the guns as you suggested?
I think they did, yeah. I mean, I think they had a real opportunity to safeguard people while they were in the Capitol. And my big concern was that, given all the threats that we've seen, and I think we've seen threats escalate over the course of this crisis. So now we've seen threats, credible threats, in my opinion, against the governor, against legislators, against law enforcement, against other state officials. And I'm concerned that something could happen at any time now. So given the fact that obviously I believe that the commission is vested with the legal authority to ban firearms in the Capitol building and on Capitol grounds, I think they should have taken that opportunity to do it just as they banned signs. I mean, clearly, you are invoking the First Amendment in some respects when you ban signs from the building, but they didn't have a problem doing that because they indicated that they didn't want paint to be chipped. Well, if you're concerned about paint being chipped, you really ought to be worried about either an intentional or an accidental discharge from a firearm. And, if we know for a fact that in terms of the Second Amendment, I mean, you do not have the ability to have a firearm of any kind, anytime you want, anywhere you want, under any circumstances that you want. That's really a bastardization of the Second Amendment to make that kind of claim. So obviously the state legislature could have chosen to take action and they didn't. And so I thought it was important that the Capitol Commission use their authority to do that. And I am still hoping one way or the other, whether it's done legislatively, whether it's done through the Capitol Commission, that we will see a prohibition on firearms before we see a very serious incident that involves mass casualties.
Attorney General, you just said there have been what you consider credible threats against the governor. Why haven't charges been filed against anyone that's making credible threats?
There have been charges that have been filed. I mean, there are cases that have not gotten widespread attention where people have been charged with terrorism. So that actually has occurred. And then there's further investigation that's being done by my office, by the FBI, on other cases right now. And
how many cases are there at this point? How many terrorism cases related to threats?
Well, there are county prosecutors that are handling some of these cases. I'm aware of one case right now that's ongoing in Wayne County involving threats against the governor and other officials. So some of these cases actually are moving forward, but my concern is at any time, and I heard your conversation, obviously it's a step in the right direction in my opinion if you ban firearms from the galleries so that you literally don't have senators or representatives who are debating bills and voting on bills who under threat of an armed gunman who's hovering over them, potentially influencing the decisions that they make. I mean, I literally think that's holding the democratic process hostage. And something I haven't heard brought up is how, both the speaker and the majority leader kind of mysteriously last minute decided to cancel session yesterday. I mean, that's the last thing we want to see, is that our democracy comes to a halt because people are afraid of what protesters may or may not do. And at any time you have somebody who might have an axe to grind with any of these individuals. And when I say that, I mean literally, since somebody brought an axe to the protest yesterday.
All right, Madam Attorney General, I got to get you out of here, but before you go, I want to test your passion on this gun issue in the Capitol. Would you participate in a petition drive to ban guns in the Capitol and let the people do it if the legislature won't?
Well, I'm getting a little bit wary about participating in petition drives, even though there are, certainly ballot initiatives that I very much support. And the reason for that is that my department then is charged with defending the state in any litigation. So would I approve, would I support a law that bans firearms in the Capitol? However, that has to happen legally. Of course, I support it. Will I be getting involved in specific initiatives? I think it's probably unwise.
Very good. Madam Attorney General, thank you for your patience this morning, for appearing with us on Off the Record. We deeply appreciate it.